Welcome back to Scripted Fear. And if you're new here, welcome for the very first time. I'm glad you're here tonight, because what you're about to hear isn't fiction. These aren't tales I pulled out of thin air, and they're not polished ghost stories made to entertain. These are accounts from real people, drivers who came forward and trusted me with their voices. When they told me these stories, they weren't smiling. They weren't laughing. Some of them had to stop mid-sentence just to catch their breath, because even years later, the memory still shakes them. And I think it's important you hear them exactly as they lived them, because these are the kinds of nights you don't just forget. And I need to ask you something. Please, don't just listen and drift away. Every one of these stories takes hours of digging, of reaching out, of listening to the people who are still shaken by what happened to them. The only way I can keep bringing their voices to you, the only way their experiences won't vanish into silence, is if you help me keep this page alive by subscribing, follow, sharing this with someone who might need to hear it. All right, with that said, let's get into tonight's story. Our first account comes from Daniel Ironhand Mercer, a man whose career was built on precision, reliability, and discipline. He wasn't just a trucker, he was the kind of driver fleet managers trusted with their most expensive loads, the kind of man who could read an engine by ear, diagnose a fault by touch, and rebuild a drive shaft under nothing but moonlight and a wrench set. With over 3.5 million documented miles and 31 consecutive years without a preventable accident, Mercer's name was known across dispatch offices from Detroit to Dallas. His PSP safety record showed 0 violations, 0 citations, and not a single rejected inspection in over 3 decades of highway work. His truck was just as disciplined as its operator, a 2019 Peterbilt 579, powered by a Cummins X15 rated at 565 horsepower. At the time of the incident, Mercer had personally logged over 420,000 maintenance perfect miles on that engine. Never a breakdown, never an unscheduled repair. He ran fluids exactly to spec, replaced belts before manufacturer service intervals, and treated his 18-speed Eaton Fuller transmission like it was a living machine. Younger drivers said if Mercer signed off on a pre-trip, you could drive blindfolded across the Rockies and make it out alive. On October 22, 2023, Mercer was hauling 43,000 pounds of steel transmission, housings, and engine blocks bound for Charlotte, North Carolina. His gross weight measured 77,850 pounds, just under the DOT's maximum legal limit of 80,000. He was southbound on Interstate 79, the heart of West Virginia coal country, a corridor of narrow grades and steep downgrades he had traveled hundreds of times without incident. The weather was flawless, clear skies, no fog, pavement dry, air temperature a stable 42 degrees. His electronic logbook showed him well within his federal hours of service, just under 8 hours into his shift, 6 hours left before he'd be legally required to stop. Mercer had no reason to expect trouble. He had cleared the last way station north of Beckley, paperwork verified, logbook up to date, inspection complete. His CB radio monitored Channel 19, where a handful of other drivers were reporting light traffic and a trooper sitting northbound near Charleston. Nothing unusual, nothing to prepare him. But at exactly 2:41 a.m., between mile markers 66 and 67, Mercer's world shifted. He began hearing it, a diesel motor that wasn't his own. Not an echo, not another truck drifting up behind him, but a second engine, humming in perfect synchronization with his Cummins, as if it were mounted directly beneath his cab. At first, Mercer dismissed the noise as an acoustic illusion, the way valleys sometimes bounce a jake, brake, or a passing horn in ways that make it sound closer than it is. Truckers call it mountain talk, sound caught and bent by stone. But Mercer knew this road too well. He had run Interstate 79 more times than he could count. He knew where echoes lived and where silence reigned. And mile marker 67 wasn't a place for tricks. Still, he scanned his mirrors, his West Coast convex, his hood mirrors, even his driver's spot. Nothing. No headlights trailing him. No shadows in the ditch. No convoy drafting his slipstream. Alone. Yet his ears betrayed him. The sound was still there. A second engine locked to his own heartbeat. To be sure, he keyed his CB mic. Southbound 79, anyone running close around 67? I've got company I can't see. 3 voices broke through static. One near Charleston, one pushing south out of Sutton, one sitting northbound past Beckley. Not one of them within a mile of his position. The road was his alone. And still, the phantom motor held steady. It wasn't vague. It wasn't faint. It was exact. When Mercer eased his throttle, watching his tachometer drift down from 1650 RPM to 1,200, the second engine fell in perfect unison, the tones blending like synchronized instruments. When he grabbed his Eaton Fuller and slid in a knife, the Phantom shifted with him. No hesitation, no lag. He downshifted again, sudden, sharp, testing it, and the Phantom dropped just as quickly, as if it knew the move before he made it. Then came the first sign it wasn't just sound. His fuel economy display flickered, then recalculated, showing a burn rate nearly double what it should have been. For his gross weight of 77,850 pounds on that grade, Mercer should have been averaging 6.2 miles per gallon. His dash reported barely 3.1. It was as though 2 engines were drawing from the same tanks. The sensation spread from his ears to his body. Mercer could feel it in his steering column, in the cab floor beneath his boots, in the shifter resting against his palm. The truck vibrated with 2 pulses now, not one. He knew the rhythm of the Cummins X15 like a heartbeat, smooth, deep, reliable, but laid over it was a second, faintly offset. Its harmonics just different enough to be wrong. By mile marker 72, the impossible escalated. On a downhill grade, his Cummins dropped to idle, Tatch resting near 700 RPM, whisper quiet. Yet the Phantom refused to follow. It roared at full throttle, as though hammering uphill with an invisible load. He checked his gauges, fuel flow spikes, consumption climbing. His truck was burning diesel at wide open throttle while his real engine barely sipped. Mercer flicked his Jake brake, compression thunder rolling through the night. His Cummins barked, slowing, holding the downgrade. But the Phantom ignored him, roaring in defiance. Engine note climbing against mechanical law itself. His truck was slowing, yet the Phantom motor screamed acceleration. That was when Mercer admitted to himself that what he was hearing wasn't a trick of acoustics, wasn't a fault in the dash electronics, wasn't fatigue. For the first time in 31 years of driving, Mercer recognized what he later described as mechanical terror, the realization that the laws of machinery, the rules he had lived by mile after mile, were breaking in front of him. It wasn't just another sound anymore. It was a machine that wasn't there, a machine that was feeding from his tanks, burning his diesel, moving in tandem with his flesh and blood. Cummins as if the two were locked together in some impossible dance. And he had 20 more miles of Appalachian dark before the next safe pull-off. At 3:19 a.m., Mercer pulled into the Tamarack Service Plaza to put his nightmare under a floodlight. He ran a DOT standard inspection by the book, put up, flashlight in hand, checking fluids, belts, filters, turbo inlet, intercooler piping, everything immaculate. The Cummins was spotless. No leaks, no overheating, no fault indicators. Yet the Phantom engine rumbled on, clear as day, occupying the same physical space as his real motor. Mercer stood in front of the truck, hood raised, listening. His Cummins idled smooth and steady, but layered over it, as distinct as 2 voices in a room, was the second engine, running at a different load, a different rhythm, occupying the same space. 40 minutes later, a certified Cummins technician, Robert Halpern, arrived from Beckley, using full professional diagnostic equipment. He ran scans across the ECM, checking every electronic parameter, oil pressure, turbo boost, injector pulse, exhaust gas temperatures. Every reading was perfect, every metric green. Yet Halpern later told investigators under sworn statement, "I heard it too. There was another engine. Not an echo, not interference. Something was running in there that our tools couldn't see. With no fault codes, no failures, and a truck operating within safety tolerance." Halpern told Mercer to continue the run. But as Mercer eased back onto I-79, the Phantom engine returned immediately, shifting with him, feeding off his accelerator, as if it had been waiting for him to rejoin the road. At mile marker 91, Mercer's confidence in the road and in his machine shattered. It began without warning, a violent jolt through the frame as though the entire truck had struck an unseen wall of resistance. His eyes shot to the gauges, oil pressure collapsing to 0 psi, coolant needles spiking past 250, tachometer falling flat. The Cummins X15 didn't sputter, didn't struggle, it seized instantly, like a giant fist clamping down on its crankshaft. In 3 decades of driving, Mercer had heard engines fail in every imaginable way. Spun bearings, dropped valves, blown head gaskets. But never like this. Never total seizure without warning. 80,000 pounds of steel and diesel lost. Its heartbeat at highway speed on a mountain grade. Mercer's instincts took over. He disengaged the clutch, feathered his air brakes, and guided the lifeless Peterbilt toward the shoulder, momentum carrying him against gravity. Every sound in the cab was magnified, the hiss of air bleeding through lines, the groan of steel under strain, the dull thump of tires striking expansion joints, and beneath it all, something more terrifying than silence. The Phantom engine never stopped. It idled steady, strong, clear as day, right there in the cab with him. His real Cummins was dead, but the ghost motor purred like it hadn't noticed. Its tone smooth, alive, mocking. Mercer sat frozen, hands locked around the wheel, staring at a dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree of failure. Low oil, high coolant, engine fault, every warning screaming red. Yet the Phantom engine hummed, unaffected, as though reality itself had split in two. Mercer set the brakes, killed his hazards, and sat listening, refusing to believe what his ears told him. He was parked in darkness along an empty mountain stretch. Tractor and trailer lifeless, except they weren't. He could feel vibration in the cab floor, in the pedals, in the shifter. A vibration that couldn't exist, radiating from an engine that wasn't real. He reached for the ignition key with a trembling hand. His logical mind told him it was futile. When an engine seizes at 250 degrees with 0 oil pressure, there is no coming back. Bearings fuse, pistons score cylinders, the crank welds itself to the block. That's not reparable. That's terminal. You don't restart a motor that's just died like that. And yet, Mercer turned the key. The impossible happened. The Cummins X15 fired instantly, roaring back to life as if nothing had occurred. Gauges climbed to normal ranges. Oil pressure back to 44 psi. Coolant dropping toward 180, RPM holding steady. No knocks, no rattles, no smoke, no hesitation. The engine ran like it had been idling in a shop all along. His ECM, which should have logged catastrophic fault codes, showed nothing. No record of the failure. As far as the truck's own computer was concerned, nothing had happened. But something had changed. Mercer could now hear 3 engines. The first was his Cummins, real, tangible, smooth. The second was the Phantom, the twin that had been with him since mile marker 67, matching every move with surgical precision. And the third, Mercer swore. This was true undersworn testimony, was a broken engine. Its sound was unmistakable, rod knock, bearing grind, metallic clatter, like a power plant tearing itself apart, a machine running on destroyed internals. Impossible to sustain, yet there it was, layered into the air of his cab. The auditory chaos became unbearable. 3 engines overlapping, occupying the same mechanical space. One alive, one impossible, one dying yet refusing to quit. He shifted back into gear, rolling southbound again, and the engines moved with him. 3 separate rhythms fused into one impossible chorus. Every shift he made, every press of the throttle, all 3 responded in unison. The Phantom twin kept perfect time. The real Cummins roared strong, and the broken third coughed and clattered in its death rattle, but never fell silent. Mercer said later that this was the first time in 31 years of driving that he doubted not just his machine, but his reality. He was piloting an 80,000-pound vehicle powered by 3 engines, 1 flesh and blood, 1 ghost, and 1 corpse. He drove on into the Appalachian dark, his hands locked to the wheel, wondering if the truck was moving forward on diesel fuel or something far older, far stranger, running beneath the mountain highway. By 11:10 a.m., Daniel Mercer rolled into the receiving yard in Charlotte, North Carolina, exhausted but alive. His logbook closing the run exactly on schedule. His Peterbilt purred flawlessly into the dock bay. No fault lights, no smoke, no complaints. To the untrained eye, nothing unusual had happened. But as Mercer idled the truck, listening to the steady hum of his Cummins. The other engines were still there. He could still hear the phantom twin, matching each idle vibration, and the broken third, rattling and grinding like it was moments from seizure. Then, the instant Mercer cut the ignition, the cab fell silent. All three engines vanished at once. No echoes, no overlapping tones, no vibrations through the frame. The silence was so sudden it felt physical, as though someone had ripped the sound out of the world. Mercer climbed down, heart still hammering, and performed his mandatory post-trip inspection. Everything was flawless. Oil at correct levels, belts and hoses intact. No leaks, no cracks, no signs of overheating. His tires were clean, tread measured safe, air pressure steady. To anyone watching, it was a perfect end to a perfect haul. But Mercer knew better. The proof was in his fuel receipts. Every documented stop along I-79 showed consumption rates that were nearly double his average burn for that weight and terrain. Fuel that should have lasted an additional 200 miles had vanished from his tanks. The anomaly matched exactly what he'd felt on the road, as though his Peterbilt had been feeding not one but two, possibly three, engines simultaneously. When Mercer returned home, he filed a formal report with his company's safety department, forwarding his ECM logs, his electronic logbook, and his receipts. Copies were submitted to the West Virginia Department of Transportation and the state police. His report remains active in the DOT's unexplained incident files. Most importantly, it is corroborated. The certified Cummins technician, Robert Halpern, the man who scanned Mercer's truck at the Tamarack Service Plaza, submitted a sworn statement that he had heard the phantom motor himself. His diagnostic equipment found nothing, yet his own ears told him otherwise. His testimony was entered into the official inquiry, giving Mercer's account a level of validation few other unexplained highway cases ever receive. And Mercer wasn't alone. Within weeks, 3 other drivers filed similar accounts from the same corridor of I-79. In October of 2023, a Freightliner Cascadia, a Kenworth W900, and a Volvo VNL, all different manufacturers, all different engine platforms. Yet each driver described the same phenomenon, an impossible second motor running in perfect synchronization with their own. Each reported doubled fuel consumption. Each experienced mechanical contradictions that defied explanation. Not one incident produced a fault code or a diagnosable cause. When state investigators compared the fuel logs, the ECM data, and the CB radio transmissions collected from Mercer and the other drivers, a chilling consistency emerged. Each case occurred between mile markers 66 and 92, a 26-mile stretch of highway running through the coal-black mountains of West Virginia. Each occurred between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. No driver had a history of falsified reports. No prior violations, no disciplinary records. Each was a professional operator with years, sometimes decades, of experience. To this day, Daniel Mercer continues driving professionally. He maintains his reputation, his spotless record, his iron discipline. But he has never again run Interstate 79 through West Virginia after dark. When asked why, he answers the same way every time. Engines don't come back from death, and I drove one that did. His report remains one of the most well-documented cases of mechanical impossibility in the DOT's active files. A case where the impossible wasn't just heard, it was measured, logged, and confirmed by multiple drivers and a certified technician. For Mercer, the silence that followed when he shut down in Charlotte was the most haunting part of all, because silence meant the engines hadn't disappeared. They had simply chosen to stop. Our second account comes from Amanda Torres, a driver with 9 years of spotless over-the-road experience, running freight for a mid-size carrier based out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. At the time of this incident, Torres had logged just over 900,000 accident-free miles, holding a Class A CDL with every endorsement, hazmat, tanker, doubles, and triples. Her record was clean, no violations, no out-of-service orders, not even a single missed inspection. Dispatchers considered her a model operator, efficient, compliant, and level-headed under stress. On the night of November 14, 2022, Torres was assigned a run out of Louisville, hauling a refrigerated load of fresh poultry destined for a distribution Hub in Atlanta, Georgia. Her rig was a 2021 Freightliner Cascadia, equipped with a Detroit DD15 505 horsepower diesel engine, pulling a 53-foot Thermo King refrigerated trailer maintaining an internal temperature of 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Her gross weight on departure, verified at the shipper's scale, was 69,400 pounds, well under the federal limit, and an easy run southbound. Weather conditions were clear that night. No rain. Dry asphalt. Temperature steady at 39 degrees. Traffic was light. Mostly other trucks threading their way down I-65 toward Nashville. Amanda's ELD placed her at just under 6.5 hours of on-duty driving, leaving her with plenty of legal hours before she would need to stop for rest. At 2:12 a.m., Torres crossed the state line from Kentucky into Tennessee, approaching a way station she knew well, the Mitchellville Way Station. Mile marker 121 on I-65 southbound had been permanently closed since 2016. Every driver in the region knew it. The facility had been boarded, its roof partially collapsed, its way pads dug up years ago. Even its signage had been removed. For Torres, it was a landmark of abandonment, a place you pass without thought, another shuttered checkpoint left to rot. But that night, as she crested the gentle rise approaching the station, the impossible appeared. The way station was open, the blue and white, open, all trucks must enter. Sign glowed bright against the night. Floodlights illuminated the station yard as though it were mid-afternoon. Amber lamps guided trucks into open lanes, their beams cutting through the dark. The building itself, gutted and abandoned for years, stood clean, lit, alive. Amanda's first thought was error. Maybe she had misread her location. Maybe she had mistaken her mile marker. But her GPS confirmed it. Mile marker 121 Mitchellville, the closed way station. Except now, it wasn't closed at all. Her onboard pre-pass transponder didn't chirp. No bypass. No green light. The rules of the road were absolute. If a way station is open, a commercial driver must enter. Federal law. Her professionalism left no room for hesitation. She flicked her turn signal, eased into the deceleration lane, and prepared to roll across scales that hadn't existed in nearly 7 years. That was the moment Torres realized. She was driving into a place that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Amanda guided her Freightliner into the long ramp, tires thumping over expansion joints, headlights washing across concrete that should have been cracked, and weed-choked but now looked freshly poured. The station yard was alive, painted lane lines sharp, sodium floodlights humming overhead, digital arrows flashing to direct incoming rigs. For a moment, she wondered if the state had quietly rebuilt the facility. But that was impossible. Every Kentucky driver would have known. The scale house window glowed with fluorescent light, blinds half drawn, the same utilitarian look as any other DOT outpost. A uniformed figure stood inside, visible in profile, clipboard in hand. She rolled her trailer slow over the scale pads, air brakes hissing, watching the overhead board light up. 69,420 pounds. Axle groupings, all within tolerance. Perfectly legal. Normally, this is where she would expect the all-clear. A wave of the hand, a green light, or a bypass screen directing her back onto I-65. Instead, the red arrow flashed. Pull ahead, inspection bay. Torres felt her stomach tighten. She had nothing to hide. Her logbook was current. Equipment in top condition, reefer unit stable. But the unease gnawed at her. She had just rolled across scales that, to her knowledge, did not exist. And now she was being flagged. She followed procedure. Signal on, first gear, easing into the inspection shed. The bay lights roared awake overhead, harsh and sterile, bouncing off steel beams and cinder block walls. She had driven through dozens of such inspections before, but something about this one felt too clean, too precise, like a photograph of an inspection shed rather than the real thing. A DOT officer stepped out from the shadow of the bay. Male, late 50s, tall, with a neatly pressed uniform. His badge read simply Inspector Harlan. He didn't smile, didn't frown, expression flat, mechanical, efficient. His boots struck the concrete without echo, as though the sound itself refused to follow. Papers, he said, voice low, monotone, as if reciting lines rehearsed 1,000 times. Amanda handed over her binder. CDL registration, medical card, bill of lading. Harlan glanced at each without focus, flipping through them with deliberate slowness. She noticed his hands, skin pale, veins too prominent, movements stiff but steady. He asked her to step down from the cab. She obeyed. Her boots hit the bay floor, cold underfoot. "Logbook," he said. She handed him her ELD printout, signed and dated. He didn't scan it, didn't even look at the hours, just held the paper, stared at it for a moment too long, then tucked it under the clipboard. "Open your trailer." Amanda keyed her latch, swung the reefer doors wide. Cold vapor poured into the night, poultry stacked high. Temperature gauge steady at 34 degrees. The inspector didn't climb inside, didn't check pallets, didn't measure seals. He just looked into the darkness for a full 30 seconds, face unreadable. Then he nodded, as if satisfied by something only he could see. "Close it." Amanda latched the trailer shut. Her nerves were burning now. None of this was by the book. A real DOT inspection involved tire gauges, brake checks, VIN verification, safety triangles, fire extinguishers. This man wasn't doing any of it. He wasn't documenting a thing. No flashlight, no tablet, no pen moving on the clipboard. Just standing, watching, commanding. Finally, he handed her paperwork back, except it wasn't hers. It wasn't her CDL, her med card, her log. It was a thin slip of yellow carbon paper, the kind issued decades ago, back before electronic logging, before digital way systems. Stamped at the top, Station 121, cleared. The date field was blank. The inspector didn't explain, didn't make eye contact, just handed it over and stepped backward into the shadows of the bay. Amanda looked down at the slip again, heart hammering. The paper was aged, yellowed, edges brittle. It looked like something pulled from an archive box, not something freshly printed. She raised her head to question him, but the inspector was gone. The bay was empty. The red light over the exit ramp flipped to green. Her inspection was over. Amanda climbed back into her cab, the yellow inspection slip trembling in her hand. She slid it into her binder out of reflex, though every nerve in her body screamed not to touch it at all. Her dash clock read 2:29 a.m., 17 minutes. Since she had first rolled across the scale, 17 minutes accounted for, burned into her ELD. This wasn't a dream. The log confirmed it. The bay's green arrow blinked steadily overhead. Amanda eased her Freightliner back into gear, brake hiss cutting sharp against the concrete walls. Her rig crept forward, following the painted exit lane back toward the main line. She could already see the glow of I-65 beyond the ramp, familiar sodium lights marking the southbound lanes. She should have felt relief. Instead, her dread only deepened. The yard was empty. Not a single other truck occupied the inspection bays, the staging lot, or the fuel island. No rumble of engines, no chatter on CB, no sound at all beyond the whisper of her own tires rolling. It was as though the way station had opened that night just for her. Halfway down the ramp, instinct pulled her eyes to the mirrors. For a split second, the station was still there, every light blazing, the bay behind her glowing like a hospital ward. And then, as her Freightliner crossed the merge point back onto I-65, the scene collapsed. The floodlights winked out all at once. The bright open sign vanished. The asphalt behind her dissolved into cracked pavement, weeds pushing through seams. The scale house shrank back into the boarded ruin she had always known, dark, silent, caved in. Her breath caught. She checked again, jerking the wheel slightly to hold her line. Eyes locked on the west mirror. Nothing, just the abandoned husk, dead and rotting under the Tennessee sky. But the yellow slip still sat in her binder. Amanda's first thought was to call it in. She grabbed her CB mic, voice shaking as she hailed southbound. "Breaker 19. Anybody else, just run 121 way. Static." She tried again, louder, tighter. "Any southbound 65s? Anybody see Mitchellville lit tonight?" A long pause, then a reply, faint, crackling, a driver 20 miles behind. "Negative, Torres. 121's been dead for years. Don't know what you're talking about." Her hands were slick on the wheel. Her ELD ticked forward, legally recording every mile, proving she hadn't stopped anywhere else. She had driven into a station that didn't exist, undergone an inspection from an officer who wasn't there, and come away with a slip of paper that belonged to another decade. By mile marker 130, Amanda noticed something worse. Her reefer unit, which had held steady at 34 degrees since departure, was now holding at 28. The dial had shifted on its own. No alarms, no faults, no fuel shortage. Just colder, as though the trailer had absorbed the chill of that impossible bay and carried it south with her. Amanda Torres didn't speak again on her radio for the next 50 miles. She drove in silence, southbound, her eyes refusing to return to the mirrors, because if the station could vanish once, she feared what she might see if it decided to come back. Amanda reached the Pilot Travel Center in Manchester, Tennessee, just past mile marker 111, nearly an hour after leaving Mitchellville. Her hours of service clock still gave her time, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking on the wheel. She needed to park, breathe, and confirm she wasn't losing her mind. She pulled her Freightliner into the truck lot, slotted neatly between two reefers, set her brake, and shut down the DD-15. For a moment, the silence pressed against her like a weight. Then, almost against her will, she reached for the binder tucked in her passenger seat. The slip was still there. Thin, yellowed carbon stock, brittle at the edges, faint grease marks along the margins as though it had been handled many times. The top read, Station 121, Kentucky. Commercial Vehicle Safety Division. But Station 121 hadn't existed for 7 years. Her eyes scanned downward, where a modern inspection form would list VINs, DOT numbers, brake measurements, and violation codes. This one was stark. Handwritten, block letters, faint but legible. Carrier name, Torres Transport LLC. Unit number, 1124. Driver, Amanda Torres. Status, cleared. That was it. No officer's signature, no printed timestamp. Just one faint rubber stamp in purple ink. November 14th, 1973. Not 2022. 1973. Amanda froze. Her company hadn't even existed then. She hadn't existed then. Her Freightliner Cascadia wasn't built until 2021. But there it was, her name. Her truck, printed onto a slip that claimed to be nearly 50 years old. She flipped the page over, half expecting the back to be blank. Instead, she found a ghost of handwriting bled through in graphite. Faint, scrawled like notes taken in a hurry. Unit checked, weight stable. Driver compliant. Proceed. And below it, an initial. A single capital letter, H. Harlan. The inspector. Amanda's chest tightened. She pulled out her phone, opened her camera, and snapped a picture of the slip. But when she checked the photo, the slip was blank. Yellow paper, yes, but no stamp, no ink, no handwriting. Nothing but an empty sheet. Her hands trembled as she tried again. Another photo, another blank image. The writing, the date, even her own name, all visible to the eye, but invisible to the lens. Amanda shoved the slip back into the binder and snapped it shut. She sat in silence, staring through her windshield into the truck stop lights beyond. For 9 years she had lived by the book, trusting in rules, scales, and inspections as the framework of the road. But now the framework had collapsed. And sitting there, under the buzz of the pilot's fluorescent canopy, she realized something worse. She had no idea if that slip would ever leave her possession. By the time Amanda rolled into Atlanta, the reefer had stabilized at 28 degrees. Her delivery was accepted without issue. No one at the distribution dock questioned the overchill. No one asked about the missing 5 degrees, or about the hour unaccounted for on her face, though it was logged clean on her. ELD. She drove away as if nothing had happened, but the slip stayed with her. 3 days later, off duty at her home in Bowling Green, she pulled the binder out again. The paper hadn't aged further, hadn't crumbled, hadn't vanished. Every line was still there to her eye. Her name, her carrier, the date stamped, November 14th, 1973. She tried again to photocopy it at a local library. Twice the copier spat out a blank yellow sheet. The following week, Amanda filed a quiet inquiry with the Kentucky Department of Transportation, asking if records existed for Station 121 or an inspector named Harlan. The response came back within hours. Mitchellville Way Station permanently decommissioned. June 2016. No active officers stationed since. 2015. No records found for inspector by that name. She pressed further, contacting an older driver she trusted, a man who'd been on the road since the 70s. At first he brushed her off, said she was tired, mistaken, maybe nodding at the wheel. But when she mentioned the yellow slip and the name Harlan, the line went quiet. Finally, he said, "I knew Harlan. Long before your time. He died in '74. Heart attack. Out on the Mitchellville lot. You sure you're not pulling my chain?" Amanda said nothing. She hung up without answering. Today, that slip still sits in her binder. Drivers who've seen it describe it differently. Some say the writing is crisp. Some claim it's faded to almost nothing. One said it was blank. But Amanda insists she sees it clearly every time she opens the page. She has never returned to mile marker 121. She runs loads around it now, detouring miles out of route just to avoid the place. And when asked why, she only says one thing: the way station isn't closed. Not for me. Not anymore. Marcus Jackson, known to everyone on the road as Big Bear, was a towering figure in the trucking world. 6'6", 300 pounds, with a booming laugh and hands like baseball mitts. He had been driving for over 20 years, and in all that time, nothing had ever rattled him. Not storms, not breakdowns, not close calls on icy roads. He had a reputation as the kind of driver who could muscle a loaded rig through hell itself and come out the other side without a scratch. On the night of October 3rd, 2019, Big Bear was pushing through the high passes of Montana's Bitterroot Range, hauling a flatbed load of lumber bound for a construction yard in Spokane, Washington. His truck was a 2015 Peterbilt 389, long-nose chrome, custom paint job with a grizzly claw down the side of the hood. Under the cab, a Cummins X15 engine growled, pushing nearly 600 horsepower up the grade. Behind him, his flatbed carried 48,000 pounds of Douglas fir timbers, secured with chains that gleamed under his floodlights. Conditions that night were unforgiving. The moon was thin, the sky starless, and the temperature had dropped to just above freezing. Patches of fog clung low to the road, and the mountains loomed black against the horizon. Cell service was spotty, CB chatter was dead, and Marcus hadn't seen another set of headlights in nearly an hour. At 1:47 a.m., his ELD placed him on U.S. Highway 12, a twisting, two-lane corridor notorious among drivers for its sharp grades and blind curves. The Bitterroots pressed close on both sides, a wall of ancient timber and rock that swallowed his headlights whole. Normally, Big Bear thrived on solitude. He liked the long stretches where the world fell away, where it was just him, his truck, and the hum of the road. But that night felt different. The silence was too heavy, too absolute. His engine seemed louder than usual, his headlights weaker, the cab smaller. The forest pressed in on him, mile after mile, until the mountain itself seemed alive. And then, at mile marker 57, the forest opened into a clearing he didn't remember. On the left side of the road stood a rusted green sign, half swallowed by vines. "Welcome to Cold Creek Village, Pop 212. Marcus frowned. He'd run this stretch of 12 more times than he could count. There was no Cold Creek Village. No truck stop, no gas station, no settlement at all. He leaned forward in his seat, eyes scanning the sign again. The paint was peeling, the lettering faded, but it was there. A half-mile later, the road curved into a set of lights. Not headlights, street lamps. Marcus downshifted, gears grinding as his Peterbilt descended into a hollow, where a small town sat nestled against the valley floor. Narrow streets, clapboard houses, a church steeple, a gas station with pumps straight out of the 1950s. Every building was lit, windows glowing, but not a soul stirred. No cars parked at curbs, no dogs barking, no movement behind curtains. Just silence. Marcus slowed, his tires thumping across seams in the pavement, his flatbed rattling as the load shifted. His GPS displayed nothing, just a thin gray line cutting through black, the device insisting he was in the middle of untouched forest. But Cold Creek Village was there, lit, quiet, waiting. As Marcus rolled deeper into the town, he felt the first cold pull of dread, a feeling he had not known once in 20 years behind the wheel. Marcus eased his Peterbilt into the heart of Cold Creek, every nerve in his massive frame straining against the wheel. His headlights swept across storefronts, straight out of another century. A barber shop with striped poles still turning, a hardware store with faded lettering, a diner with checkered curtains hanging in the windows. All of it immaculate, all of it lit from within, yet not a single trace of movement. He rolled past the gas station, an old Sinclair pump island, the kind with glass globes on top and prices frozen at 31 cents a gallon. The concrete beneath it looked freshly swept, clean, untouched by weather, time, or rot. His mirrors showed the station lights burning behind him, steady as his own dash cluster. But what cut deepest wasn't the silence. It was the stillness. Cold Creek wasn't abandoned. It was paused. Curtains hung mid-fold as though caught in a breeze that never finished. A dog's leash dangled from a porch rail, taut at the end like something invisible held it. A bicycle leaned against a lamppost, its wheels still spinning as if someone had just dismounted seconds before. Marcus's hand hovered over the CB mic. He wanted to break the silence, to say something, anything, to prove he wasn't the only living thing moving through this hollow. But his gut, the gut that had kept him alive through 2 decades of storms and near rollovers, told him not to. Told him if he called out, something in this place might answer. At 12 miles per hour, he crawled deeper into the town square. The street lamps here burned brighter, their light pale and sickly, not sodium orange, but white blue, humming faintly like high voltage. In the center of the square stood a statue of a man, bronze turned green with patina, one arm outstretched toward the highway. The plaque at its base was too corroded to read, but the face stopped him cold. It wasn't worn, wasn't vague the way most old statues were. It was detailed, sharp. The jawline, the creases at the eyes, the set of the mouth, all of it real, too real. And though the statue's eyes were cast in bronze, Marcus swore they locked onto his windshield as he rolled past, tracking him inch for inch. He dropped another gear, breath shallow in his chest. His headlights caught the church at the far end of town, a tall steeple stabbing against the black sky. Its doors stood open, spilling light across the steps like a beacon. And in that moment, Marcus realized something that nearly made him stall out on the spot. Every window in Cold Creek was lit, but behind every pane of glass, there was no one. The houses were furnished, the tables set, the curtains drawn halfway, but no people, no life. The glow came from bulbs that burned steady, unflickering, unpowered. And still, his GPS showed nothing. No streets, no intersections, just forest. By the time Marcus reached the edge of the square, he knew one thing for certain. Cold Creek wasn't a town you found on Highway 12. It was a town that found you. And tonight, it had chosen him. The square was silent but alive with tension. Marcus's Peterbilt idled, low rumble reverberating off storefront glass, bouncing back at him like the town itself was listening. He gripped the wheel until his knuckles burned white, eyes fixed on the figure at the church steps. At first, he thought it was just a trick of exhaustion, a shape in the fog, a mannequin left to rot. But the longer he looked, the clearer it became. It was a man, or it had been, once. The uniform was unmistakable, Kentucky State Police. Circa 1970s by the cut of the shirt, the tilt of the hat, the shine of the boots. But the details didn't fit. The badge was tarnished, edges eaten with corrosion. The fabric of the shirt was too clean, too stiff, like it had never bent with motion. The boots reflected light that wasn't there. And then there was the face. Marcus tried not to look at it, but his eyes betrayed him. The features were almost human, but something in the symmetry was wrong. The nose too straight, the mouth slightly open and never closing. The eyes, black, depthless wells, glinting as though something inside them shifted when the light hit. No blink, no breath, no life. The figure's head tilted, a jerky, unnatural angle, like a marionette tugged by a careless string. Its hands hung loose until, with one slow motion, it raised an arm, palm flat, facing out. Stop. Marcus's chest tightened. His instincts screamed to press the throttle, but his foot disobeyed. It slid against the brake, pressed it down. The Peterbilt exhaled, brakes hissing, flatbed groaning as the load pressed forward. The truck came to rest dead center in the square, beneath the glow of a humming street lamp. The figure lowered its arm and lifted something else. A clipboard. The faint metallic clink of its clip rang out louder than it should have, sharp in the stillness. Pinned beneath it was a slip of yellow paper. Old-style carbon, brittle at the corners. The same type inspectors had used decades ago. The figure held it high, as though offering it, as though commanding him to take it. Marcus's stomach flipped. He'd been inspected 100 times across a dozen states. Level 1s, log checks, reefer thermals. But never like this. Never in a place no map admitted existed. His headlights caught the page. Blank. Entirely blank. No carrier info, no DOT number, no violations. Just pale yellow emptiness waiting for ink. The figure tilted its head again. Closer this time. It stepped down from the church's stone steps. Boots hitting pavement with no sound. Marcus's rig shuddered. Not from movement, but from something in the air, like pressure. Heavy, electric, radiating from the figure as it advanced. His rear-view mirrors quivered. The load chains rattled though no wind blew. His CB crackled faint static even though the mic lay untouched. He wanted to honk, to blast the air horn and scatter whatever this was back into the dark. But his hand refused to move. It stayed frozen on the wheel, veins taut. Every muscle locked as though the entire cab had been welded to his will. And then, through the thick quiet, a sound cut through. Not words, not breath, but the slow, deliberate scratch of a pen across paper. Marcus's eyes flicked to the clipboard. The blank slip wasn't blank anymore. A line had appeared across the top, shaky but legible. Driver, Marcus Big Bear Jackson. But he hadn't signed anything. The figure lowered the clipboard slightly, tilting it toward him as though waiting for him to acknowledge it. That was when Marcus knew. This wasn't an inspection. This was a contract. And Cold Creek wanted his name on it. The square had gone still again, but it wasn't silence anymore. It was pressure. A low vibration that pressed against Marcus's chest, made the fillings in his teeth hum, made the air in the cab feel thick like syrup. His Peterbilt's engine idled rough, pistons knocking off beat as if even the machine knew it shouldn't be here. The figure advanced one step at a time. Its boots didn't crunch gravel, didn't echo, didn't even disturb the puddle of lamplight it crossed. With each step, the clipboard angled higher, closer, until Marcus could read the faint lines bleeding into existence on the slip. Driver, Marcus Big Bear Jackson. Carrier, blank, waiting. Date, October 3rd, 2019. The form was writing itself. Marcus's breath came ragged, fogging the inside of the windshield though the night was cold. He forced his right hand free, broke it from the wheel, reached toward the shifter. His instincts screamed, get it in gear, get out, don't stop, don't look back. But the second his fingers brushed the shifter, the entire rig died. Headlights snapped out, dashlights black, engine cut mid-rev. A silence so total it rang in his ears. The only light left came from the street lamps overhead, casting Cold Creek in their pale, electric glow. And in the reflection of his windshield, Marcus saw movement. Every window lining the square was no longer empty. Shadows had gathered in them. Dark, human shapes pressed behind glass. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all watching. No faces, no details. Just silhouettes, stacked shoulder to shoulder, unmoving. The figure with the clipboard stopped at his bumper. It raised its head, those bottomless eyes catching lamplight. And for the first time, its mouth moved. Not open, not shut, just stretched wider. Too wide. A gash across its face. The clipboard lifted higher. The slip was almost full now. Carrier, long-haul freight lines. Cargo, Douglas fir lumber, 48,000 pounds. Marcus hadn't written a word, and yet it was his handwriting. He fumbled for the door handle. Yanked. Nothing. The lock was stiff, frozen. He tried the passenger side, same thing. His air horn button, dead. Even the CB was hissing nothing but white static. Then the cab light flicked on by itself. Above his visor, tucked into the edge of his logbook, a pen had appeared. A cheap black ballpoint. He hadn't put it there. He knew every object in his cab down to the last stub of receipt. And this pen wasn't his. The clipboard tapped against his windshield. One sharp, metallic clink. The figure was holding it up now. Paper pressed against the glass, pen waiting. At the bottom of the slip, one final line had appeared. Driver's signature. Underscore. The shadows in the windows leaned closer. The town was waiting. Marcus's hands shook. His choices narrowed to one, sign or refuse. And something in his gut told him that whichever choice he made, he wasn't getting out clean. Marcus stared at the line. His own name, his cargo, his carrier, all of it already filled out in his handwriting. The only thing missing was the signature. The figure stood there motionless, clipboard pressed to the glass, pen poised above the empty line. The shadows in the windows leaned closer. packed so tight against the glass their outlines blurred into one solid mass. He thought of his wife, asleep back in Roanoke. Thought of the 2 grandkids who called him Papa Bear, who begged to climb up in the cab every time he came home. He thought of every mile he'd driven through storms, through fatigue, through bone-breaking loneliness, just to put food on their table. And then he thought of something else, a rumor he'd heard once, whispered in a truck stop at 2 a.m. about phantom inspectors. A driver swore he'd seen one outside St. Louis, a man who carried blank slips that wrote themselves, slips that bound you tighter than any DOT fine ever could. The man said the trick was simple: don't sign. Ever. No matter what happens, don't sign. Marcus dropped his eyes to the slip. The pen trembled in the figure's hand, its tip hovering over the line like it could feel his hesitation. His fingers twitched against the wheel, the urge to grab it, to scrawl his name and make the thing go away, clawing up his arm. Instead, Marcus did something else. He spat, one sharp spray of spit onto the inside of his windshield, right where the signature line glowed faint through the glass. The effect was instant. The clipboard jerked back. The shadows in the windows convulsed, recoiling in unison. The street lamps flickered, buzzing high-pitched like angry hornets. And the figure, its mouth tore wider, splitting ear to ear, a howl ripping out that Marcus felt in his bones more than heard in his ears. The rig roared back to life. Dash lights surged, engine coughed, then bellowed steady as if it had never died. Without thinking, Marcus slammed the shifter, dropped the clutch, and floored it. His Peterbilt screamed out of the square. Chains rattled, tires squealed. The load groaned as the town blurred past in streaks of ghostly light. In his mirrors, Cold Creek warped, twisting, storefronts stretching upward like shadows cast against fire. The figure shrank into the distance, arms still outstretched with the clipboard, mouth gaping in silent rage. And then, nothing. Just black forest again. Mile marker 12 flashing by. No square, no lamps, no church. Only highway. Marcus didn't stop until he hit Richmond. 3 hours later, running on pure adrenaline. When he finally parked, he checked his binder. Every inspection slip was there, except one. A yellow carbon sheet lay pinned inside, blank except for one faint line. Driver refused signature. No officer name. No date. Just those words. Marcus never saw Cold Creek again. He rerouted every trip to avoid Highway 12, even if it meant losing money, burning fuel. But the slip never left his binder. And sometimes, when the cab light flickered just wrong, he swore he could hear a faint scratching sound from behind the page, like a pen waiting, forever waiting, for him to change his mind. By the time Tony Rivas rolled into Grant County, the night had gone thick and heavy. The kind of air that clings to your skin, humid enough that every breath feels like drinking water. His Peterbilt's dash clock glowed 2:04 a.m., and he'd been awake nearly 20 hours, running on fumes and the bitter bite of gas station coffee. The load was poultry feed, nothing glamorous, nothing that paid well, but it was steady work. And Tony knew better than to turn down steady work. The backroads weren't his first choice, but dispatch routed him this way to shave off mileage. 2 lanes of cracked blacktops stretching endlessly, no streetlights. No signs of life except the occasional flicker of a farmhouse lamp far off in the trees. His eyelids kept pulling shut. He slapped his cheek, muttered curses to himself, cranked the volume on the radio. Nothing but static across every dial. No country, no weather, not even the faint hum of AM talk. Just static. He told himself he'd find a pull-off. Maybe a gravel shoulder wide enough to nap for 20 minutes before dawn. But the road kept curving, winding him deeper into farmland. Every field looking the same. Rows of soy stretching into blackness. The stalks whispering against each other when the wind pushed across them. And then his headlights caught something. At first, Tony thought it was a fence post. Something tall and narrow breaking the horizon line. But as the beams swept closer, the shape filled in. Shoulders, arms, a head cocked slightly to the side. He squinted, leaning forward in his seat. It looked like a scarecrow, the kind of crude, human-shaped thing farmers left to keep crows off their crops. But it was dressed wrong. Not rags, not overalls. A suit, a dark, 2-piece suit hanging perfectly straight over a thin frame. The figure stood planted between 2 rows of soy, its hands limp at its sides. For a second, Tony thought maybe it was a mannequin. Maybe kids playing a prank, sticking it out there to spook late-night drivers. But as the truck rolled closer, his stomach tightened. Because it wasn't the body that moved. It was the face. The figure didn't step, didn't shift an inch. But its head rotated, tracking him. Slowly, unnaturally smooth. Following the truck's advance like a camera mounted on a pivot. Eyes locked dead onto the windshield. Tony's chest tightened. He pressed his foot a little heavier on the accelerator. The diesel engine rumbling louder as if to drown out his nerves. It's nothing, he told himself. Some drunk farmer. Some weirdo playing games. Just drive, keep rolling. But something in him, a driver's instinct, honed over years of nights like this, whispered otherwise. This wasn't a man, wasn't some prank. Something was off in a way that clawed at the animal part of his brain. He gripped the wheel harder, held his eyes straight ahead, refusing to give the figure the satisfaction of a second glance. But he couldn't help himself. The moment his rig passed, he flicked his eyes to the side mirror and froze. The field was empty. The figure gone. No rustle in the rows, no retreating shape, nothing. Just soy plants swaying gently under the moonlight, like nothing had ever been there at all. Tony's hands were slick with sweat now, slipping slightly against the wheel. His heart pounded, and the fatigue that had weighed him down seconds ago was gone, burned clean away by adrenaline. Something was out here with him, watching, waiting, and the road ahead had no end in sight. The next mile felt like 10. Tony's eyes kept darting between the broken asphalt and his mirrors, searching the fields for any hint of movement. Nothing, just the rows of soy, silver under the moon, swaying lazily as if mocking him. He told himself he was imagining it. He told himself the fatigue was making shadows dance. But then his headlights caught something again. Up ahead, on the shoulder. It was him. The same figure. Same dark suit. Same rigid stance. Standing not 30 feet off the road this time. Only now Tony could see the face clearly, and every nerve in his body screamed. The skin looked wrong. Too tight. Like parchment stretched over bone. The mouth hung slack and wide. Jaw unhinged as if it had come loose. And the eyes, God, the eyes, caught the beams of the Peterbilt and reflected silver, like polished coins pressed into the sockets. Not white, not red, silver. Tony cursed under his breath, swerved wide to give the figure room, his trailer's tires skimming the edge of the ditch. The whole rig shook. His heart slammed so hard he thought his ribs might split. And then the CB crackled. At first it was static, a faint hiss breaking the silence. Tony leaned instinctively toward the mic, hand trembling. Maybe another driver. Maybe someone to ground him in reality. Someone who could confirm he wasn't losing his mind. But the hiss cut clean, and a voice slid into the cab. A man's voice. Flat, low, deliberate. Pull over. Tony's blood froze. He whipped his hand to the knob, spun it hard. The channel shifted, but the voice didn't vanish. Pull over. It wasn't coming from the CB. It was coming from every speaker. In the cab, the dead radio, the intercom, even the static box he hadn't touched in years. The sound vibrated in the walls, in the glass, inside his skull. Hell no, he rasped, shoving the pedal down. The Peterbilt roared, the road screaming under his tires. But the voice followed. Pull over. Every time it repeated, it grew louder, deeper, like it was inside the truck with him. Tony's chest heaved, his palms slick on the wheel, eyes flicking desperately to the windshield. And that's when he saw him again. The man was standing in the middle of the road, directly in his lane, arms out, palms up, as if welcoming the rig straight into his body. Tony's breath snapped short. He slammed the brakes, the cab shuddering, trailer fishtailing sideways, tires screaming against asphalt. He prayed the load wouldn't jackknife and flip him. The rig groaned, strained, but held. And when the headlights locked onto the figure, for the first time, it moved. Not a step, not a walk. It bent. The body folded forward, spine creaking, bones snapping audibly through the night air. The head bent lower, lower, until it was inches from the asphalt. But the legs never moved, never bent at the knees. The figure's entire frame bowed like a hinge, folding itself in half, staring at him upside down with that slack, silver-eyed face. Tony screamed. He shoved the shifter into gear and floored the pedal. The diesel roared back to life, and he barreled forward, aiming straight through the nightmare. His eyes squeezed shut, braced for the thud of impact, for the windshield to explode in shards of glass. But nothing came. No crunch, no scream, no body. The road was empty. And when Tony dared to look back into the mirror, the man was running. Behind him, not on the shoulder, not fading into the rows, running dead center down the lane, sprinting at impossible speed, his pale face bouncing in and out of the red glow of Tony's taillights. The silver eyes locked onto the back of the cab, the mouth still gaping wide. And no matter how fast Tony pushed, the figure stayed there, always in sight, always chasing. Tony didn't remember how long he drove. His mind was locked, hands rigid on the wheel, his entire body vibrating with the rig as if he and the truck had fused into one machine. Every time he glanced at the mirrors, he swore he still saw it, still saw that thin figure, sprinting in the wash of red taillights. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but never gone. Never completely gone. Finally, 20 miles later, the glowing green sign of a pilot travel center cut through the night like salvation. The lot was half-lit, scattered with semis parked nose to tail, engines humming low, their drivers asleep inside. To Tony, it was the most beautiful sight in the world. He pulled in too fast, brakes screaming, the trailer groaning as it struggled against the sudden stop. The hiss of the air brakes drowned out everything else. He sat there for a moment, frozen, knuckles white on the wheel. His body didn't want to move, didn't want to open the door, didn't want to risk looking outside. But finally, with a deep, shaking breath, he forced himself down from the cab. His boots hit the pavement, knees buckling under him. A few drivers milling by the pumps gave him quick, curious looks. The kind of looks you give someone having a breakdown but don't dare ask about. Tony ignored them. He stumbled into the convenience store, poured the hottest coffee he could find into a cup, and tried to stop his hands from shaking long enough to sip it. He told himself he was safe now. Around people, around lights. He told himself it was fatigue, his brain short-circuiting after too many hours awake. A hallucination, a dream. But then he stepped back outside and froze. His truck sat under the halogen lights, chrome grille gleaming, dew already settling across the hood. At first nothing seemed off, but as he walked closer, his stomach sank. Something was on the windshield. Tucked neatly beneath the wiper blade was a slip of paper. Old, yellowed, the edges frayed and brittle, like it had been waiting years in someone's pocket. Tony's hand shook as he pulled it free. He didn't want to look, didn't want to know, but his eyes dropped anyway. For words, scrawled in thick silver ink. "We'll see you again." His breath caught. He dropped the paper like it burned him. But when it hit the ground, the wind didn't carry it away. It stuck to the asphalt as though the pavement itself wanted to keep it. That was years ago. Tony still runs freight, still drives, but never through Grant County. He'll go 3 hours out of the way to avoid those roads. He's changed companies twice, switched trucks, thrown out every scrap of paper he found in the cab. But sometimes, when the night is quiet and the miles stretch too long, he swears he can still hear that voice, faint, buried in the static of the radio. Pull over. And no matter how many times he tosses it out, that slip of yellowed paper always finds its way back into his glove box.